The diner was bustling with activity when a rude customer sneered at a hardworking waitress. "People like you don't deserve a tip." Phones recorded the scene, but no one intervened until a calm, commanding voice cut through the tension. Turning around, everyone froze. It was Donald Trump, and he wasn't staying silent. The story begins inside a bustling, upscale diner in the heart of New York City. The clinking of silverware and faint hum of casual conversations fill the air, blending with the soft glow of afternoon sunlight through large windows. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon wafts through the room, giving the place a welcoming yet hectic vibe. Emma Johnson, a young waitress in her early 20s, weaves between tables with practiced ease. Her ponytail bounces as she balances trays filled with steaming plates. Though her warm smile doesn't falter, her tired eyes hint at a long double shift. Emma works tirelessly, trying to save money for her mother's medical bills, which seem to grow heavier with every passing day. At one corner of the diner, Donald Trump sits quietly with an assistant. Dressed in a dark blazer with an open-collared shirt, he looks unusually relaxed. A cup of coffee sits untouched beside a small stack of documents, but his sharp eyes glance around the room occasionally. The hard-working staff catches his attention, particularly Emma, whose dedication is evident in every movement. Nearby, customers chat, laugh, and scroll through their phones. It's just another busy afternoon in the diner, but in a few moments this ordinary scene will turn into an unforgettable lesson about dignity, respect, and doing what's right. Emma Johnson worked tirelessly, her steps swift as she maneuvered through the busy diner. She balanced a tray laden with steaming plates, her ponytail swinging with each turn. At just 22, Emma carried more responsibility than most her age. Her smile was kind, but faint dark circles under her eyes told a different story. Emma wasn't just here to earn a paycheck. She was saving every dollar she could for her mother's medical bills. Her mother had been diagnosed with a serious illness months ago, and since then Emma had been juggling long shifts to help cover the mounting expenses. Despite the weight she carried, she made sure every customer received the same cheerful service. Her uniform, a crisp white blouse and black skirt, was clean but slightly faded. She adjusted her apron as she greeted a table of regulars, Mr. Green and his wife, who always asked for her section. "Good to see you both," she said warmly, pouring fresh coffee into their cups. The older couple smiled, clearly appreciative of her thoughtful demeanor. But not all customers were as kind. Emma was used to rude remarks or impatient sighs from those unwilling to wait. She handled these moments with quiet grace, keeping her head high even when faced with sharp words. As Emma moved to the next table, she briefly noticed a quiet corner booth. Donald Trump sat there, casually dressed, and reviewing some papers with an assistant. His presence was understated, but his sharp eyes caught everything. Emma didn't recognize him yet, too focused on keeping up with the bustling crowd. Her day had been long, but Emma kept pushing forward. Little did she know, her strength and patience would soon be tested like never before. And in that moment, someone unexpected was paying close attention. The diner's doors swung open with a sharp clang, drawing brief glances from the customers inside. Striding in was Richard Daniels, a middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit. His polished shoes clicked loudly against the tiled floor as he entered, exuding an air of entitlement. With a quick glance around, he frowned slightly, as if the bustling diner wasn't up to his standards. Richard was accompanied by a colleague, a younger man in a similar suit who seemed more subdued. The two made their way to a booth near the center of the room. Richard barely acknowledged Emma as she approached their table, holding a notepad and wearing her usual warm smile. "Good afternoon," Emma said cheerfully. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Richard didn't even look up from his phone. "Coffee?" "Black," he muttered curtly, his tone sharp. Emma nodded, unfazed by his lack of courtesy. She turned to his colleague, who ordered with a polite, "Please." Richard glanced up briefly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Emma. His gaze lingered a second too long, filled with a subtle disdain that she felt but chose to ignore. As she walked away, Richard leaned over to his colleague and muttered, "Service these days. What can you expect?" His voice carried just enough for Emma to catch it, though she kept her head high and focused on her task. Richard's presence immediately changed the energy in the diner. His loud voice, impatient sighs, and dismissive mannerisms stood out in the otherwise welcoming atmosphere. Even other customers glanced at him uneasily, sensing the tension he brought into the room. Unbeknownst to Richard, someone was observing him carefully. In the quiet corner booth, Donald Trump took a sip of his coffee, his sharp eyes following the interaction. Emma returned to Richard Daniels' table with a steaming cup of black coffee. She placed it gently on the table, offering her usual warm smile. "Here you go, sir. Are you ready to order? Or would you like a few more minutes?" Richard barely glanced up. "I'll take the ribeye, medium rare," he said briskly, sliding the menu toward her without a word of thanks. His colleague ordered more politely, and Emma jotted it all down with practiced ease. As she turned to leave, Richard called out, "And don't mess it up. I don't want to wait all day." His tone was laced with irritation, his eyes narrowing as if daring her to respond. Emma paused for half a second, but kept moving, choosing not to let his words bother her. She had dealt with customers like him before, people who saw servers as invisible or unworthy of respect. Minutes later, she returned with their food, balancing the plates with precision. As she set the dishes down, Richard immediately inspected his steak with exaggerated scrutiny. "What is this?" he said loudly, causing a few nearby diners to glance over. Emma blinked, unsure of the issue. "Is there something wrong with your order, sir?" Richard sneered. "It's not cooked right. I said medium rare, not medium well. Can't you follow simple instructions?" His colleague shifted uncomfortably, mumbling, "It looks fine to me." But Richard wasn't finished. He leaned back in his seat, his voice dripping with condescension. "Figures," he said, smirking. "You can't expect much these days from people like her." The words hit Emma like a slap. She froze for a moment, her professional demeanor slipping slightly as her cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped, deciding it wasn't worth escalating. Unbeknownst to her, Donald Trump had been watching from his corner booth. His sharp eyes darkened as he caught Richard's comment. Trump leaned forward slightly, his demeanor calm but tense. For now, he remained silent, choosing to observe how the situation unfolded. Emma quietly walked away, her head high but her hands trembling slightly. Richard chuckled under his breath, clearly pleased with himself. From his quiet corner booth, Donald Trump watched the scene unfold with a keen eye. He had noticed Richard Daniels the moment the man walked into the diner. His loud voice and arrogant posture stood out in the otherwise friendly atmosphere. Now, as Richard smirked and made his cutting remarks, Trump's expression hardened. Trump leaned back in his chair, folding his arms as he observed Emma. Despite the obvious insult, she handled herself with remarkable grace, walking away without letting her professionalism slip further. But Trump could see the slight tremor in her hands as she placed the tray back at the server's station. "Did you hear that?" Trump's assistant whispered, leaning toward him. "He's being completely disrespectful." Trump nodded slightly, his sharp gaze fixed on Richard. "I heard it," he said calmly. "Let's see how far this guy goes." Richard's voice carried across the room as he turned to his colleague, still complaining about the steak. "You'd think they could hire people who know what they're doing," he said, loud enough for the surrounding diners to hear. Some customers exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. Trump's jaw tightened. He scanned the room, noting the unease among the other patrons. No one seemed willing to intervene, either out of fear or indifference. His focus shifted back to Emma, who returned to the table with a pitcher of water. Her composure remained intact, though her movements were more hesitant now. As Richard continued his tirade, Trump made a quiet decision. Enough was enough. While he had initially planned to enjoy a quiet meal, this man's behavior crossed a line. Trump leaned forward, preparing to step in if Richard pushed further. As Emma returned to Richard Daniels' table to clear the empty plates, her polite smile remained, though the strain in her posture was evident. "Was everything okay with your meal?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension. Richard didn't look up, merely waving his hand dismissively. "Yeah, whatever," he muttered. His colleague offered a small nod and a polite, "Thank you." But Richard remained indifferent. Emma quickly tidied the table and placed the check in a black folder, leaving it neatly in front of Richard. "I'll be your cashier whenever you're ready," she said before stepping back to give them space. Minutes later, Richard and his colleague stood to leave. Emma walked over to collect the folder, only to find it empty. No cash, no card receipt, just a crumpled napkin with a scrawled message. "Maybe next time you'll learn to listen." Emma's breath hitched, but she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She folded the napkin and slipped it into her apron, determined not to let her emotions show. She turned back toward the kitchen, her steps slower now. From his booth, Donald Trump had seen it all. His sharp gaze followed Richard as he strutted toward the exit, his smug demeanor unchanged. Trump's assistant raised an eyebrow. "That guy didn't leave a tip?" Trump's expression was unreadable for a moment, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "No, he didn't. And he left something worse," he said, standing up. Richard paused near the door, chatting loudly with his colleague. Trump strode toward him, his movements deliberate and composed. The hum of the diner quieted as customers began to take notice. "Excuse me," Trump said, his voice calm but commanding. "You forgot something." The diner grew silent as Donald Trump approached Richard Daniels near the entrance. Richard, mid-sentence in his loud conversation, turned to see the imposing figure standing before him. Trump's calm but firm expression left little room for argument. "You forgot something," Trump said, holding up the check folder with the receipt inside. His tone was steady, but the weight of his words carried through the room. Richard blinked, confused for a moment before smirking. "I didn't forget anything," he said dismissively. "I paid for the meal, didn't I?" Trump raised an eyebrow. "You forgot the tip, and you left a message that says more about you than it does about the service here." He tilted his head slightly, his gaze piercing. "Let me guess, you think that's acceptable behavior?" The smug grin on Richard's face faltered. He glanced around, noticing the growing attention from other customers. Phones were discreetly pointed in their direction, and whispers spread across the room. "Look, I don't owe her anything," Richard said, trying to sound confident but failing. Trump stepped closer, his voice lowering but gaining intensity. "You don't owe her anything. She worked hard to serve you, handled your attitude with professionalism, and this is how you repay her, with insults and no tip?" Richard shifted uncomfortably, his bravado cracking. "It's not that big a deal," he muttered. "It is a big deal," Trump shot back. "The way you treat people, especially those working hard for a living, shows exactly who you are. And right now, you're showing everyone in this room what kind of person you are." The tension in the diner was palpable. Customers leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the confrontation. Richard's colleague took a step back, clearly embarrassed. Trump crossed his arms, his voice unwavering. "So, what's it going to be? Are you going to fix this? Or are you walking out and proving to everyone here that respect is beyond you?" Richard's mouth opened as if to argue, but he hesitated. The weight of the moment, combined with the eyes of the crowd and Trump's unrelenting presence, left him speechless. The tension in the diner grew heavier as Richard Daniels stood frozen, his confident smirk now replaced with unease. All eyes were on him, including the unrelenting gaze of Donald Trump, who stood firm, arms crossed, and voice steady. Richard glanced around, realizing the growing crowd was against him. Phones recorded every second, and even the waitstaff had paused to watch. His colleague nudged him gently, whispering, "Maybe just leave a tip and let's go." But Richard wasn't ready to back down. "Look, I don't see why this is such a big deal," he said, his voice defensive. "She didn't do anything special. It's her job to serve people, and I didn't like the service." Trump's expression didn't change. Instead, he took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. "Her job is to serve." "Yes," Trump said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "And she did it well, even while you insulted her. Your job is to show basic decency, but apparently, that's too much to expect." The room murmured in agreement, the quiet voices of the crowd building pressure on Richard. He shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. "It's not like I hurt her or anything," he muttered. Trump tilted his head slightly, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Disrespect can do more harm than you think. You walked in here with an attitude, insulted a young woman working hard to support herself, and left without giving her the dignity she deserves. That says everything about you." Richard's face flushed red. "Why do you even care?" he snapped, attempting to regain control. Trump didn't flinch. "Because respect matters. And when I see someone like you treating others like they're beneath you, I'm not going to stay quiet. Not now, not ever." The room was silent except for the faint buzz of whispers. Even the manager had come out from the back, standing quietly near the register as the scene unfolded. Richard's colleague cleared his throat. "Maybe we should just go, Richard." Trump raised a hand, stopping them. "Not yet. You're going to fix this," he said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "Right here, right now." Richard looked at Trump, then at the crowd, and finally at the table where Emma stood silently, her eyes wide but steady. The weight of the moment bore down on him. He reached into his pocket reluctantly, pulling out his wallet. With shaking hands, he placed 2 bills on the counter and muttered, "Fine. There. Happy now?" Trump didn't even glance at the money. Instead, he held Richard's gaze. "Apologize to her." The crowd let out a collective gasp, the demand hanging heavily in the air. The diner held its breath as Donald Trump's words echoed through the room. "Apologize to her." The demand was clear, and all eyes turned to Richard Daniels. Richard's face flushed deeper, his composure cracking under the weight of the moment. He glanced at Emma, who stood near the server's station, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. She didn't speak, but her quiet strength spoke volumes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, growing louder as people whispered their thoughts. "He should apologize," a man muttered to his wife, who nodded in agreement. "She didn't deserve any of that." "Yeah, make him say it," a younger customer added, phone raised to record every second. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room as the growing support for Emma became undeniable. "I already left a tip," he said defensively, his voice tight. "What more do you want from me?" Trump didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, and his voice, though calm, carried unshakable authority. "I want you to show some respect. The tip doesn't erase what you said or how you acted. You owe her an apology." The murmurs grew louder, a few diners clapping softly in agreement. Emboldened by the moment, one of the other waitresses chimed in. "He's right," she said firmly. "You treated her like she wasn't even a person." Richard's jaw clenched, and for a moment it seemed like he might argue. But the weight of Trump's presence and the crowd's collective judgment finally broke through his defiance. With a reluctant sigh, Richard turned toward Emma. His eyes barely met hers as he mumbled, "I'm sorry." Emma, poised but visibly affected, nodded slightly. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tension. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, and for the first time, Richard seemed to understand the gravity of his actions. As the quiet applause faded, the tension in the diner began to ease. Richard Daniels, now visibly humbled, muttered something inaudible to his colleague before turning to leave. His shoulders were stiff, and his steps hurried, as if escaping the weight of his actions. Donald Trump watched him go, his expression calm but thoughtful. The confrontation had ended, but Trump wasn't done yet. He turned toward the server's station, where Emma stood frozen, unsure of how to process everything that had just unfolded. Trump approached her, his demeanor softening. "You handled yourself well," he said warmly. "Most people would have broken under that kind of treatment, but you stayed strong." Emma blinked, a mixture of gratitude and surprise crossing her face. "Thank you," she said softly. I didn't want to make a scene." "You didn't make the scene," Trump said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "He did. And people like him need to be reminded that their behavior won't go unchecked." He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. Without hesitation, he placed several crisp $100 bills on the counter in front of her. "Consider this the tip you deserved. And more," he said, his voice sincere. Emma's eyes widened, her hand instinctively moving to protest. "I can't accept this. It's too much." Trump held up a hand, silencing her gently. "You can, and you will. Hard work deserves recognition, and you've more than earned it." A few customers nearby clapped again, some murmuring words of encouragement. Emma's cheeks flushed, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from gratitude. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steadier now. Trump nodded. "Keep your head high. You're stronger than you realize." With that, he turned and walked back to his table, leaving Emma with a renewed sense of pride. The video of the confrontation didn't take long to make its way online. By the time Donald Trump left the diner, clips recorded by multiple bystanders were already circulating across social media platforms. The footage captured everything: Richard Daniels's dismissive behavior, Trump's calm but firm intervention, and the applause that followed Richard's reluctant apology. The video was simple but powerful, sparking immediate reactions. Within hours, the hashtag #respect hard work began trending. One clip posted to Twitter read, "Donald Trump defends waitress after customer refuses to tip. This is how you stand up for what's right." The video gained over 1 million views in the first few hours, with thousands of comments pouring in. "This is the leadership we need. Respect is everything." Finally, someone using their platform to call out bad behavior. "This made me realize how often I've stayed silent in situations like this." Not anymore. News outlets quickly picked up the story, amplifying its reach. Headlines appeared across major platforms. "Donald Trump stands up for waitress in viral video. Customer faces public backlash after Trump defends restaurant worker. Respect for service workers takes the spotlight." Emma's story also began to emerge as a focal point. Local journalists contacted the diner to learn more about her, and one customer who frequented the diner shared additional details online. "Emma is one of the hardest working people I know," the post read. "She's always kind, even when people don't deserve it. What happened today wasn't just about Trump. It was about showing the value of everyday workers." Meanwhile, Richard Daniels faced swift backlash. Users online quickly identified him, and his employer released a statement distancing themselves from his actions. "We do not condone the behavior exhibited in the viral video. We are committed to upholding values of respect and dignity for all." At the diner, Emma was overwhelmed by the attention. Customers began coming in, not just for food, but to offer words of encouragement. Some even left large tips with notes like, "This is for the strength you showed." A local charity also reached out to offer financial help for her mother's medical bills. Trump, however, remained characteristically reserved about the attention. When his assistant brought up the online reactions, Trump simply nodded. "It's not about the headlines," he said. "It's about showing people that standing up for what's right matters." The video continued to gain traction, inspiring conversations about the importance of respect, especially for service workers. For Emma, the experience wasn't just about surviving a bad day, It became a reminder that even in the face of disrespect, kindness and dignity always prevail. Back at his office later that evening, Donald Trump sat in his leather chair, his phone buzzing non-stop with notifications. The video of his confrontation at the diner had gone viral, dominating social media and news headlines. While his assistant excitedly recapped the story's massive reach, Trump's focus remained elsewhere. "Over 1 million views in just a few hours," the assistant said, scrolling through her tablet. "Everyone's talking about how you stood up for that waitress. It's trending everywhere." Trump leaned back, his fingers steepled as he stared out the window. "Good," he said calmly, but there was a thoughtful edge to his voice. "But this isn't about going viral. It's about making sure people understand the message." His assistant hesitated. "Do you think people will get it? Or are they just here for the drama?" Trump turned to face her, his expression serious. "Some will get it, some won't. That's how these things work. But if even a few people start treating others with more respect because of this, then it's worth it." He paused, reflecting on the incident. "You know," he continued, "I've met a lot of people like that man today. Arrogant, entitled, and completely blind to how their actions affect others. They think they're better than everyone because they've never had to work hard a day in their lives." The assistant nodded, listening intently. "And Emma?" she asked. "She seemed incredibly strong." Trump allowed a faint smile. "She reminded me of my mother, actually. Hardworking, dignified, and resilient no matter what life throws at her. People like Emma keep the world running, and they don't get the recognition they deserve." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk. "When someone like that is disrespected, it's not just an insult to them. It's an insult to all the hardworking people out there who face the same thing every day. That's why I stepped in. Not for the cameras, not for the attention, but because it was the right thing to do." The assistant smiled. "Well, the world's definitely noticing. Respect hard work is still trending, and people are sharing their own stories about standing up for service workers. It's becoming a movement." Trump nodded slowly. "Good. People need to understand that respect isn't just about being polite. It's about recognizing the humanity in others. If this moment helps even one person think twice before treating someone poorly, then we've done something meaningful." He glanced at his phone again, where countless messages of support poured in. But Trump wasn't interested in the praise. His focus remained on the lesson. Treating people with respect and dignity isn't optional. It's essential. As the night stretched on, Trump's reflection deepened. He had always been known for making waves, but this time, the ripple effect wasn't about him. It was about a young woman's quiet resilience and the power of standing up for what's right. The morning after the incident, Emma Johnson arrived at the diner for her usual shift. As she tied her apron and prepared to take orders, she noticed something different, a warmth in the air that hadn't been there before. Several regulars greeted her with more enthusiasm than usual. "Good to see you, Emma," said Mr. Green, the retired teacher who always sat in her section. "You handled yourself with such grace yesterday." Emma smiled shyly, her cheeks flushing. "Thank you," she replied. "I just tried to keep my head down." Another customer handed her a folded note along with a generous tip. "For your strength," the note read. Emma felt her chest tighten, tears threatening to spill. She quickly tucked the money into her pocket, grateful but overwhelmed. As the morning rush began, Emma's co-workers came by with quiet words of support. "You're trending, you know," one of them said with a grin. "The video is everywhere." Emma hadn't watched it yet. She wasn't sure she wanted to relive the moment, but the steady flow of encouragement around her gave her a new sense of pride. Later that afternoon, a local reporter stopped by to interview her about the experience. At first, Emma hesitated, unsure if she wanted the spotlight. But as she spoke about the support she'd received, her confidence grew. "What Mr. Trump did wasn't just about me," Emma said firmly. "It was about reminding people to treat everyone with dignity. I'm grateful he spoke up when no one else would." By the end of her shift, Emma felt lighter. The outpouring of kindness from strangers and regulars alike gave her a renewed sense of hope, not just for herself, but for the power of standing up for what's right. While Emma received an outpouring of support, Richard Daniels faced a starkly different reality. The viral video of his behavior spread rapidly, with viewers condemning his actions and calling for accountability. Social media was flooded with comments. "This guy's arrogance is unreal. Glad someone stood up to him. How can anyone treat a hardworking waitress like that?" Kudos to Trump for calling him out. People like Richard need to learn respect. By the next day, Richard's name and face were all over the internet. Online sleuths quickly identified him, revealing his position as a mid-level manager at a prominent financial firm. The backlash extended to his workplace, with angry messages pouring into the company's social media accounts. The firm released a public statement. "We are aware of the incident involving one of our employees, Richard Daniels, and we do not condone the behavior exhibited in the viral video. Our organization is built on values of respect and dignity, and we are taking this matter seriously." Within hours, Richard was called into an emergency meeting with his supervisors. Despite his attempts to downplay the incident, the evidence was undeniable. "Your actions reflect poorly on our company," his manager said sternly. "We can't afford this kind of reputation." Richard was placed on indefinite leave, and whispers of termination circulated among his colleagues. As news of his suspension spread, Richard's personal life also began to unravel. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. Even his colleague from the diner expressed regret for not stepping in to stop him. Feeling cornered, Richard issued a public apology on social media. "I deeply regret my actions at the diner. My words and behavior were unacceptable, and I take full responsibility. To Emma and everyone affected, I am truly sorry." The apology, however, did little to repair his tarnished image. Many viewed it as insincere, written out of necessity rather than genuine remorse. Meanwhile, the incident served as a broader wake-up call. Online discussions emphasized the need to confront disrespectful behavior in real time rather than remaining silent. Richard's downfall became a reminder of the consequences of entitlement and the power of accountability in the digital age. The incident at the diner quickly became more than just a viral video. Across social media, conversations erupted about the importance of respect, especially toward service workers. Stories flooded in from waitstaff, bartenders, and retail employees who had endured similar treatment but never had someone like Donald Trump to stand up for them. The hashtag #Respect Hard Work became a rallying cry, inspiring people to reflect on their own actions. Parents shared the video with their children, using it as a teaching moment. Teachers played it during class discussions about kindness and fairness. "This isn't just about a diner," one tweet read. "It's about how we treat each other, especially those working hard to make an honest living." For Emma, the experience had been overwhelming, but it left her feeling empowered. She began receiving handwritten letters from strangers, many of whom shared their own struggles in service jobs. "You reminded me to keep my head up," one letter said. "Thank you for being strong." Trump, meanwhile, remained characteristically direct when asked about the incident during an interview. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about standing up when you see something wrong. Respect and kindness should never be optional." The story's impact reached far beyond the diner's walls. Local businesses began implementing better training programs to ensure their staff felt supported in dealing with difficult customers. Online, people pledged to be more mindful in their everyday interactions. By the end of the week, the story had sparked a shift in perspective for many. It wasn't just about calling out bad behavior. It was about fostering a culture where dignity and kindness prevailed. Emma's resilience, coupled with Trump's intervention, reminded everyone that even small acts of courage could create ripples of change.